The town of Willow Creek lay cloaked in a pristine blanket of snow, its streets silent save for the crunch of boots and paws. Christmas lights twinkled faintly through the frost-covered windows, casting a soft glow onto the icy sidewalks. Isaac trudged through the quiet neighborhood, the leash of his golden retriever, Clover, loosely gripped in his hand. The dog walked beside him with a steady, deliberate pace, his amber eyes flicking up to Isaac every so often as if to check on him. For Isaac, these evening walks were a lifeline. A veteran of war, he carried scars deeper than the ones on his skin. The relentless buzz of the town during the day overwhelmed him, a cacophony that echoed the chaos of the battlefield in his mind. But at night, with the snow dampening every sound, he could almost feel at peace. Almost. Clover, ever watchful, was more than a companion. Since the day Isaac had adopted him from a shelter 2 years ago, the dog had been a silent guardian, sensing Isaac's moods with uncanny precision. When the nightmares came, vivid memories of sand, smoke, and screams, it was Clover who nudged him awake. When panic clawed at his chest in crowded spaces, it was Clover's calm presence that kept him anchored. Tonight, however, something about Clover felt different. The golden retriever was restless, his ears perked up at the faintest sound, his nose twitching as if catching a scent carried on the icy breeze. He kept glancing toward the line of trees at the edge of the neighborhood, the shadowy forest that seemed to breathe its own mysteries. "What is it, boy?" Isaac asked, his voice gravelly from disuse. Clover barked once, low and sharp, then tugged at the leash, urging Isaac forward. Isaac hesitated. The forest wasn't a place he frequented. It reminded him too much of the dense, hostile jungles he had navigated during his deployment. But Clover's insistence was unusual. The dog's steady gaze met Isaac's, imploring. With a resigned sigh, Isaac loosened the leash. "All right, lead the way." Clover bolted into the snow-dusted trees, his golden coat a streak of movement against the dark trunks. Isaac followed, his boots crunching through the drifts. The air grew colder as they ventured deeper, the wind whispering through the branches. Isaac's breath clouded in front of him, and his heartbeat quickened, not from exertion, but from the gnawing unease that came with the forest's stillness. Suddenly, Clover stopped, his body stiffening as he stared at something ahead. Isaac hurried to catch up, his pulse pounding in his ears. That's when he saw her. A small figure lay crumpled in the snow, barely visible beneath a thin, tattered blanket. Her dark hair was matted with frost, and her lips were tinged blue. Isaac's heart clenched as he dropped to his knees beside her, his military training kicking in. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. There was a pulse, faint but steady. "She's alive," he murmured, more to himself than to Clover. The dog sat vigilantly by the girl's side, his warm breath misting in the cold air. Isaac shook her gently. "Hey, little one, can you hear me?" The girl stirred, her eyelids fluttering open for a moment. Her gaze was unfocused, but her lips moved, forming words too soft for Isaac to catch. He leaned closer, his ear nearly brushing her face. "Nathan," she whispered. "Nathan." Isaac froze. The name hit him like a thunderclap, reverberating through memories he had long tried to suppress. Nathan, his younger brother, the one he hadn't spoken to in years. The brother he had blamed, unfairly perhaps, for a fight that fractured their family. What could this girl possibly know about Nathan? "Hold on," Isaac said, shaking off his shock. He scooped her up into his arms, cradling her frail body against his chest. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, her small frame alarmingly light. "Come on, Clover," he called, his voice steadier than he felt. The golden retriever trotted ahead, as if sensing the urgency of the situation. Isaac moved as quickly as he could through the uneven terrain, the girl's head resting against his shoulder. Every few steps, he glanced down at her, praying that she would hold on until they reached help. The town hospital was a 10-minute drive from his house. By the time they arrived, Isaac's fingers were numb from the cold, but his focus never wavered. He burst through the emergency room doors, shouting for assistance. Nurses and doctors swarmed around him, taking the girl from his arms and rushing her onto a gurney. Isaac stood frozen in the waiting area, the weight of her whispered words settling over him. Nathan. The name lingered in his mind like a ghost, stirring memories he thought he had buried. His brother's face flashed in his thoughts, smiling, then angry, then distant. They hadn't spoken since the fire. A soft nudge against his leg brought him back to the present. Clover sat at his side, his head resting against Isaac's knee, as if offering silent reassurance. "I don't know what this is about," Isaac muttered, running a hand through his graying hair. "But something tells me you do." Clover tilted his head, his eyes reflecting the soft light of the waiting room. In them, Isaac found a strange, steady resolve that he couldn't quite explain. Whatever was happening, he knew one thing. It wasn't over yet. The hospital waiting room was quiet, except for the faint hum of overhead lights. Isaac sat slouched in a hard plastic chair, his hands clasped tightly as he stared at the floor. Clover lay at his feet, his head resting on his paws, his calm presence grounding Isaac in the moment. Still, his mind churned with questions. The girl, Sophie, was being treated for hypothermia, and the doctor said she was stable. But it wasn't her condition that weighed on Isaac. It was her words. Nathan. The name echoed in his mind, dredging up memories he had long since buried. Nathan had been everything to him once. A younger brother full of energy, the kind of person who could light up a room with his laugh. But that was before the fire, before the accusations, before the distance that grew like a canyon between them. Isaac had convinced himself he was better off leaving the past behind. Now, it seemed the past had found him. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. A nurse approached, her expression kind but professional. "Mr. Hayes? Sophie is awake and asking for you." Isaac glanced down at Clover, who raised his head expectantly. With a sigh, Isaac rose and followed the nurse down a brightly lit hallway to Sophie's room. The girl looked impossibly small on the hospital bed. Her dark hair spread across the pillow like a fan. She smiled weakly when she saw him, her eyes lighting up at the sight of Clover padding in behind him. "Clover," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The golden retriever wagged his tail and sat beside her bed, his head tilted as if listening. Isaac cleared his throat, stepping closer. "Hey there. You gave us a scare. How are you feeling?" "Better," Sophie replied. Her gaze shifted to him, curious and unwavering. "You're Clover's owner, the hero's dog." Isaac frowned, caught off guard. "Hero's dog? What do you mean?" Sophie hesitated, her small hands gripping the blanket. "I've heard stories about a dog named Clover who saved people in a fire. They called him a hero." The words hit Isaac like a punch to the gut. He had never heard this story before. A fire? When was this? "A long time ago," Sophie said softly. "Before I was born. My grandma told me about it." Isaac's pulse quickened. "Did your grandma say where this happened?" "Willow Creek," Sophie said. Her next words stopped him cold. "It was your brother's house." Isaac staggered back, his breath catching. "My brother?" Sophie nodded, her expression serious. "Nathan, that's his name, isn't it? I heard it when I was out there in the snow." "How do you know about Nathan?" Isaac demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. Clover let out a soft whine, and Isaac immediately softened his tone. "I'm sorry. I don't understand." Sophie glanced at Clover, as if drawing strength from the dog's calm presence. "I don't know how I know. I just do. It's like I see things sometimes, people, places. I think that's why I went to the woods. Something was pulling me there." Isaac didn't know how to respond. The logical part of his mind wanted to dismiss her words as the imagination of a child, but something about her sincerity struck a chord. He thought of Clover's behavior that night, the way the dog had pulled him into the forest without hesitation. It was as if Clover had known, too. "Is Nathan okay?" Sophie asked suddenly. "Is he alive?" Isaac hesitated, his throat tight. "I don't know. We lost touch a long time ago. But you're going to find him, right?" Sophie's eyes shone with a kind of faith that Isaac didn't feel. "Clover will help you." Isaac opened his mouth to reply, but no words came. He turned to Clover, who stared up at him with an intensity that felt almost human. For the first time in years, Isaac felt the stirrings of hope. a fragile thing, but undeniable. Back at home later that night, Isaac couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Clover lay nearby, his head resting on his paws, watching Isaac with quiet patience. The old dog's presence was comforting, but it didn't ease the whirlwind of thoughts in Isaac's mind. He pulled out his phone and opened a search engine, typing Nathan Hayes Willow Creek Fire. The results were sparse, but one article caught his eye. Local man accused of arson after home fire. Isaac's heart pounded as he clicked on the link. The article was dated nearly 10 years ago, detailing a fire that had destroyed Nathan's home. Nathan had been accused of starting the blaze, though the charges were later dropped due to lack of evidence. Still, the damage to his reputation had been done. The article mentioned that Nathan had left Willow Creek shortly after. Isaac leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling. Why hadn't he known about this? The last time they had spoken was during the argument, a bitter, angry exchange that ended with both of them saying things they couldn't take back. Isaac had assumed Nathan wanted nothing more to do with him. Now, he wondered if he had been wrong. Clover let out a soft whine, drawing Isaac's attention. The dog stood, his tail wagging slowly, and nudged Isaac's leg with his nose. It was a familiar gesture, one that Clover used when he wanted Isaac to move, to take action. "You think I should go after him, don't you?" Isaac murmured. Clover barked once, a sharp, decisive sound. Isaac sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, let's see where this takes us." The next morning, Isaac drove to the town archives, hoping to dig deeper into the fire and Nathan's disappearance. Clover sat in the passenger seat, his head out the window, the cold winter air ruffling his fur. Isaac couldn't help but smile at the sight. For all the heaviness in his heart, Clover's simple joy was infectious. At the archives, Isaac combed through old newspapers and public records. What he found painted a troubling picture. The fire had been ruled accidental, but whispers of foul play lingered in the community. There were mentions of a local developer, a man named Frank Dempsey, who had been trying to buy Nathan's property before the fire. Nathan had refused to sell, and shortly afterward, the blaze had destroyed everything he owned. Isaac's jaw tightened as he read. Dempsey's name came up in connection with other incidents, legal disputes, accusations of intimidation, but nothing had ever stuck. It was clear the man had influence, the kind that kept his hands clean no matter how much dirt surrounded him. As Isaac closed the last file, he felt a spark of determination ignite within him. Nathan had been wronged, and if there was even a chance to make it right, Isaac owed it to his brother to try. "All right, Clover," he said, standing up. "We've got work to do." Clover barked in agreement, his tail wagging furiously. Isaac couldn't help but smile. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose, and he wasn't facing it alone. The drive to the outskirts of Willow Creek was quiet, save for the faint hum of the engine. Isaac gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing. Clover sat in the passenger seat, his head resting on the armrest, golden fur glinting in the weak sunlight that filtered through the frost-coated windshield. The dog's calm demeanor steadied Isaac's nerves, but his thoughts remained a storm of uncertainty. The clues from the archives had pointed Isaac toward a trail he wasn't sure he wanted to follow. The fire that had destroyed Nathan's life wasn't an accident. It was starting to look like sabotage, orchestrated by Frank Dempsey, the influential developer who had been after Nathan's land. The more Isaac thought about it, the clearer it became. Finding Nathan wasn't just about reconciliation. It was about uncovering the truth. As the car wound its way through narrow country roads, the scenery shifted. Snow-draped fields gave way to thick forests, and the air seemed to grow colder. Isaac glanced at Clover, who sat upright now, ears perked. The dog's alertness made Isaac's chest tighten. Whatever they were heading toward, it wouldn't be simple. Isaac parked the car near a weathered sign that read Red Creek Woods, private property. The tip-off he'd received from a former neighbor of Nathan's suggested this was where his brother had disappeared to, though no one had seen or spoken to him in years. Isaac grabbed his coat, and Clover leaped out of the car, landing gracefully in the snow. "All right, boy," Isaac muttered, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Let's find him." Clover took the lead, his nose low to the ground, sniffing out a trail that Isaac couldn't see. The woods were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy, oppressive. Isaac's boots crunched against the snow, each step a reminder of the isolation around them. Memories of patrols and hostile territory flickered in his mind, unbidden. He shook his head, focusing on Clover's steady movement ahead. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a small clearing. At its center stood a cabin, weathered and sagging under the weight of years and snow. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, a sign of life. Isaac's breath caught in his throat. This had to be it. As he approached the door, Clover barked once, sharp and loud. The sound echoed through the clearing, and Isaac felt a pang of apprehension. From inside, he heard movement, the scrape of a chair against the floor. The door creaked open slightly, and a man's face appeared in the gap. Isaac froze. The face was older, thinner, but unmistakable. Nathan. Isaac. Nathan's voice was hoarse, disbelieving. He opened the door wider, revealing a man who looked as though he had weathered more storms than any one person should. His eyes darted to Clover, widening in recognition. Clover? Is that you? The golden retriever barked again, tail wagging furiously, and bounded up to Nathan, nuzzling against his hand. Nathan knelt, his hand trembling as he petted the dog. For a moment, it was as though the years between them had vanished. Isaac stood frozen, unsure of what to say. Finally, he cleared his throat. It's been a long time, Nate. Nathan looked up, his expression guarded now. Yeah, it has. He straightened, his posture stiff. What are you doing here? Isaac hesitated. I found Sophie. She was lost in the woods, nearly frozen. She mentioned you. Nathan's face clouded. Sophie? Is she okay? She's fine, Isaac assured him. But she knew things, Nate. Things about you. About the fire. At the mention of the fire, Nathan's jaw tightened. He stepped back, opening the door wider. You'd better come inside. The cabin's interior was sparse but functional. A wood-burning stove, a battered table, and a few shelves lined with books and supplies. Nathan gestured for Isaac to sit, but the tension between them was palpable. Clover settled near the stove, his presence a quiet bridge between the two brothers. I never thought I'd see you again, Nathan said finally, his voice low. Not after everything. I didn't know, Nate, Isaac said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. I didn't know about the fire, or the accusations. I should have been there for you. Nathan laughed bitterly. It wouldn't have mattered. Once Dempsey had me in his sights, the whole town turned against me. People love a scapegoat. Isaac leaned forward. I've been looking into it. I found records, old articles, complaints about Dempsey. There's a pattern, Nate. He wanted your land, and when you wouldn't sell, he burned it. Nathan finished grimly. Yeah, I figured that out a long time ago. But no one cared. The cops, the lawyers, they all took his side. So I left. Isaac felt a surge of guilt. I should have fought for you. I should have. You were fighting your own battles. Nathan interrupted, his tone softening. I know that, Isaac. I've always known that. The silence that followed was heavy but not hostile. For the first time in years, the brothers were speaking not as adversaries but as allies. As night fell, they began piecing together the events surrounding the fire. Nathan revealed that, in the months leading up to it, he had received threats, anonymous letters warning him to sell the property. When he refused, strange things started happening. Tools went missing, the barn caught fire, and finally, his home burned to the ground. Clover had been there that night. Nathan described how the dog had barked furiously, waking him and giving him just enough time to escape. But in the chaos, Clover had disappeared. Nathan had assumed the dog hadn't made it, until now. I never stopped thinking about him, Nathan said, scratching Clover's ears. He saved my life. Isaac nodded, his resolve hardening. We can't let Dempsey get away with this. We have to go back, Nate. Clear your name. Nathan looked doubtful. It's been years, Isaac. What if no one believes us? They'll believe Clover, Isaac said firmly. And Sophie. That kid knows more than she should, Nate. She's part of this somehow. Nathan hesitated, then nodded. All right, let's do it. As they prepared to leave the cabin, Isaac felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, he wasn't walking it alone. Clover trotted beside him, his golden tail wagging as if to say, "We've got this." The past wasn't finished with them, but neither were they finished with the past. Willow Creek's courthouse loomed in the distance, its steepled roof piercing the overcast sky. Snow swirled lazily around Isaac and Nathan as they stepped out of Isaac's truck, Clover trotting faithfully beside them. Nathan hesitated at the foot of the courthouse steps, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "Are you sure about this?" Nathan asked, his voice tight. Isaac put a reassuring hand on his brother's shoulder. "You've spent too long hiding, Nate. It's time the truth came out. You've got me, Clover, and Sophie. We'll make them listen." Nathan glanced down at Clover, who wagged his tail in encouragement. "All right," he said, his tone resolute. "Let's do this." Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. A small crowd had gathered in the main chamber, murmurs of curiosity filling the room. At the center of it all was Frank Dempsey, seated confidently at a polished table, his sharp suit a stark contrast to the room's humble decor. His lawyer sat beside him, exuding an air of smug certainty. Isaac's hands clenched into fists at the sight of Dempsey. He wanted nothing more than to confront the man directly, but Nathan's voice stopped him. "Let's stick to the plan." At the front of the room, Sophie sat with her grandmother, bundled in a bright red coat that made her look even smaller than she was. She waved at Isaac and Nathan, her face lighting up when she saw Clover. The dog trotted over to her, eliciting a giggle as she scratched behind his ears. Isaac leaned down to Sophie. "You ready for this, kid?" Sophie nodded, her expression serious. "I remember everything now." Isaac smiled, the girl's confidence bolstering his own. "Good. Let's get started." The hearing began, the judge calling the room to order. Nathan's lawyer, an old friend Isaac had called on for help, presented their case, detailing the events that had led to Nathan's exile. At first, Dempsey's lawyer scoffed at the allegations, dismissing them as baseless. But then, Sophie spoke. The room fell silent as the young girl recounted her strange visions. She described the night of the fire with chilling clarity, details that only someone who had been there, or seen it in some inexplicable way, could know. Her small voice carried an undeniable weight, and for the first time, Dempsey shifted uncomfortably in his chair. When Sophie finished, Isaac stepped forward with Clover. "This dog saved lives that night," Isaac said, his voice steady but impassioned. He woke Nathan up, gave him time to escape. And now, years later, Clover led us back to the truth. The judge frowned, clearly skeptical. "A dog can't testify, Mr. Hayes." "No," Isaac admitted, "but actions speak louder than words." Clover found Sophie in the woods and led us to Nathan. "He's more than just a dog. He's living proof of what happened that night." Nathan stood next, his voice breaking as he recounted the threats, the sabotage, and the ultimate betrayal that cost him everything. His testimony was raw and emotional, and for the first time in years, Isaac saw his brother not as a man beaten down by life, but as someone determined to reclaim it. As the hearing continued, Isaac watched Dempsey closely. The man's veneer of confidence was cracking, beads of sweat forming on his brow. It was clear that the weight of the evidence, combined with Sophie's inexplicable insight, was getting to him. Finally, the judge called for a recess, leaving the room buzzing with tension. Outside the courthouse, Isaac, Nathan, and Sophie huddled together with Clover. The dog wagged his tail, oblivious to the gravity of the moment, but providing comfort nonetheless. "What if it's not enough?" Nathan asked, his voice tinged with doubt. "What if he walks away again?" Isaac looked at his brother, his jaw set. "We'll keep fighting. You're not alone anymore, Nate. We've got each other, and we've got Clover." Nathan smiled faintly, the first genuine smile Isaac had seen on him in years. "Thanks, Isaac." When the court reconvened, everything changed. One of Dempsey's former employees, a maintenance worker, had come forward during the recess. Inspired by Sophie's bravery and the mounting evidence, he confessed to being coerced by Dempsey into setting the fire. The man's testimony was the final piece of the puzzle, corroborating everything Nathan had said. The judge's gavel came down with a decisive thud. Mr. Nathan Hayes is hereby exonerated of all accusations related to the fire at his property. Furthermore, a formal investigation into Mr. Frank Dempsey's dealings will commence immediately. Applause erupted from the crowd, a wave of relief and vindication washing over the room. Nathan slumped back in his chair, his shoulders shaking as years of tension melted away. Isaac placed a hand on his brother's back, his own eyes misting. "We did it," Isaac said softly. Clover barked, his tail wagging furiously as if to celebrate. The snow fell heavier as they stepped outside, but this time, it didn't feel oppressive. It felt cleansing, as if the entire town was being given a fresh start. Sophie ran ahead, Clover bounding beside her, their laughter echoing through the crisp air. Nathan turned to Isaac, his expression serious. "Thank you for everything. I don't think I could have done this without you, or without Clover." Isaac chuckled. "He's the real hero here." Nathan knelt down, wrapping his arms around Clover's neck. The dog licked his face, and for a moment, the world seemed brighter. "He's more than a hero," Nathan said. "He's family." Isaac nodded, his heart swelling. "And so are you." Later that evening, back at Isaac's house, the group gathered around a modest Christmas tree. The lights twinkled softly, reflecting in the warm glow of the fireplace. Sophie sat on the floor, wrapping a red ribbon around a small box. "What's that?" Isaac asked, curious. "It's for Clover," Sophie said, grinning. "A hero deserves a present." When Clover nosed open the box later that night, he found a shiny new collar with a small tag that read, "Hero, forever in our hearts." The dog barked happily, his tail wagging as he licked Sophie's face in thanks. For the first time in years, Isaac felt a peace he hadn't thought possible. The weight of his past no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a foundation, a story that had led him here, to this moment, surrounded by family. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Willow Creek in a quiet, peaceful white. And for the first time in years, Isaac knew that he wasn't alone. The bonds of family, old and new, had been reforged, all thanks to a golden retriever who never stopped believing in them. Thank you very much for watching the video to the end. If you were moved by the story of the canine hero and the spirit of Christmas that transformed lives, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments what you thought of this exciting journey.